have no idea what they're talking about. Anybody? Ever? Right? Yeah, we've all had those kind of teachers, and you thought, what are they talking about? I don't get what they're talking about, and maybe it was a subject that you really didn't like, or maybe it was a subject that just confused you, or maybe just that teacher was just confusing. Right? And I think that the ironic thing is that Jesus probably was one of those teachers. I think often the disciples probably went away from the teaching and went, what was that? What is he talking about? They're confused all the time. And as you read through the Sermon on the Mount, which is Jesus' most famous sermon, sometimes you read things and you're like, I just don't really understand what he's saying. Yet he is God, so we probably should still follow him, right? I mean, like, it is God. And so maybe that's part of the problem, right? That God is trying to communicate to humans, and he says some things that we don't understand sometimes. So what Jesus is trying to do during this series is he's trying to elevate our minds and take them to a new place. Unfortunately, in this time and place where Jesus was, 2,000 years ago, he was amongst people who had fallen into a rut. They'd fallen into a rut, and the rut was this. They felt like if they followed a particular set of rules, that they could get into heaven. That the better they could follow these rules, the better chance they had to get into heaven. And when Jesus came, and he started teaching some of the things he was teaching, he was not teaching, the better you can follow these rules, the more apt you are to get into heaven. He didn't teach that. Instead, he came, and what he did is he died on the cross for our sin, so that it doesn't matter how good we are. Jesus died for our sin, and if we accept his death, it's not about following a bunch of rules. Now, when you come to know Christ, do you want to live a more righteous life for God? Absolutely. But that's a byproduct. That is not the key issue. The key issue is your belief in him. So as we look through the sermon, obviously at this time, Jesus had not died on the cross yet. He's in his teaching phase, where he taught for about 3 years, from about age 30 to 33, before he died, and then went to be with his Father in heaven. So as we're looking through this, we've kind of put up this theme verse, which comes from Colossians, where the Apostle Paul writes this: set your what? Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. And that's what Jesus is trying to do. He's trying to bring us to a deeper level of maybe some of the rules and regulations that we felt like we were living by. So, in Matthew 5:33, we're going to talk about something that's kind of an interesting topic. You don't hear maybe a lot of talk about this in church, but it's focused on the oath. What is the oath? So here's what Jesus says. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. So Jesus is basically saying, do not swear an oath. Now, let's just kind of talk about this a little bit. What does the Bible mean by an oath? Here's what the Bible means. So an oath is basically a solemn promise, often invoking a divine witness regarding one's future action or behavior. It also is a sworn declaration that one will tell the truth, especially in a court of law. So an oath is something that you make, and you usually bring in something else into your promise that assures that you're going to be telling the truth. So the Old Testament often guaranteed the fulfillment of promises with an oath. So God actually used the oaths down through the ages. But the problem was that during Jesus' time, that some of the church people were kind of fixated on kind of bending the rules a little bit. So they would do things like this. They might have a conversation, and somebody says, well, I don't really believe that what you're saying is true. And so they'd say, well, I swear on the pinnacle of the temple that it's true. By saying that I swear on the pinnacle of the temple that it's true, they're trying to say, this is how much I'm telling the truth. I'm swearing on the pinnacle of the temple. And because the pinnacle of the temple was something that was revered by people, they'd say, well, he must be telling the truth. He's swearing on the pinnacle of the temple, all right? But yet, swearing, the Pharisees knew, though, that by swearing on the pinnacle of the temple, it was not like swearing in God's name or something. So it was a little lesser than what it could have been, which gave the Pharisee or the church person a loophole to get out of what he's saying, because it wasn't completely true. So essentially what this came down to is that the church people or church leaders or Christians in that time, people who were God followers, were essentially bending the truth by deceiving people and kind of going around their backs. They were saying one thing and doing another, and using the oath as kind of verification that what they're saying was true, even though they knew what they're saying wasn't true. And Jesus is seeing into their hearts and saying, this is not right. So, oaths, properly handled, received approval from God. But the oaths and the way they were being used in Jesus' day and age weren't holding water. And so, maybe you've seen this, or you've seen it in a movie, or maybe you can experience it yourself, where there's kids on a playground, and somebody's saying something, and someone says, that's not true, and the other one says, yes it is, and to prove it, they'll say something like, I swear on my grandmother's grave, right? Or I swear on the Bible, or I swear on something that proves that what I'm saying is true. Maybe we don't hear that as much anymore, but they use something else other than themselves to prove that it was true. This even happens today, right? Like in our court of laws, we'd say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Because what we're basically saying is, we can't believe you what you're going to say, so we need you to swear on something bigger than yourself, so that there's going to be a consequence if you don't tell the truth. And throughout history, that consequence was, you were basically swearing in front of God that you're telling the truth. And if you don't tell the truth, well, God help you, right? That was kind of the way it worked. Now, I don't think that the weight maybe is carried so much in our culture anymore as it used to be for that. But that's the reason we have people swear in a court of law. Now, when Jesus says, you've heard it said, he's going back to the Old Testament. They've heard it said, and probably from this passage in Leviticus, do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your God, for I am the Lord. So what is meant by swearing? First, let's get this out of the way so we make sure we're all on the same page. Are we talking about profane language or cursing? No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about making an oath to prove you are saying what is true. So we're talking about basically an oath. It's the kind of swearing that you're swearing that something is true, not like profane language. Essentially, what we're talking about is credibility. Jesus is talking about credibility. Because what he says in there is something you probably heard before, because it's a common phrase, right? That your yes, be yes, and that your what? No, we know, right? Like, this is just something we've heard, and it's kind of become a colloquialism in our time, but it's just something we've heard. But it comes from the Bible. It comes from Jesus. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no, and you don't need to swear an oath or anything else to prove that what you're saying is true. You should be living such a life that people just believe you because you're saying what you're saying. But maybe we've kind of veered into a place where you're thinking, well, I don't know if my yes is just yes and no is no, and so we have people swear at things to prove that what they're saying is true. We're basically talking about credibility. So what is credibility? Credibility is basically the quality of being trusted and believed in, or being convincing. That's what we talk about when we talk about credibility. Now, there are some great examples of people who didn't have credibility down through the history of our world and in movies and stuff like that. And there was a show, I think it's actually still running. I haven't watched it in years, but the show's called Survivor. Has anybody ever heard of Survivor? Right? And this game is based on deception. Right? I mean, the more that you can trick people or make people believe you, then the better chance you have of winning the game. And early on in this, when Survivor first started for the first several seasons, there was a guy who came on, and his name was John Dalton. And John Dalton was a guy that, behind the scenes in front of the camera, he's telling everybody, everybody believes me, everybody thinks I'm something I'm not, I'm totally going to win this game, I have this game just, it's running exactly the way I want it to. And so he gets to this point in the game where he's starting to people are starting to lose faith in him, thinking, I don't know if we can really trust him, I'm not sure we can trust him or not. John's kind of just being evasive and stuff. And then they had an episode which is sometimes called the Family and Friends episode. I don't know if you know this, if you watch the show, this is what happens. So there's people on this island, right? They're all on this island, they're competing to try to stay on the island, and every week somebody gets voted off the island. And then they have, because they're lacking food and they're not around their family and they're trying to stay alive somehow, they sometimes will have a Family and Friends Day, right, where they have picked one person in advance, and that person comes to the island, and they get to hang out with a family, somebody that they care about for a day, right? And so as the family and friends are getting off the plane, John sees his friend, his best friend comes, and so he sees his best friend, so he runs over, and he kind of gives him a hug, and then his friend kind of like stops him and goes over, and his friend whispers something in his ear, and then John, just like his countenance changes, and he starts like holding his head, and he's like almost on the verge of tears, and everyone's like, John, what happened? John, what's going on? And then they find out that John's grandmother had died while he was on the island. And his best friend just broke the news to him that his grandmother had died. So his friend leaves, all the families leave, and they continue to play this game. And John continued to try to convince people of things. And when he couldn't convince them of something, he would say, I swear on my dead grandmother's grave, it's true. And people felt so much compassion for him, knowing that his grandmother had just died, they did what he said. And he ended up getting really far into the game. Now, what we found out after the show is that his grandmother had not died at all. It was completely set up. So before he left on this trip to the Survivor game, he had told his best friend, look, sometimes they have a family and friends day. If the family and friends day happens and they fly you to the island, come up and whisper in my ear because I'm going to pretend that my grandmother died so people will feel sorry for me and have pity on me and believe me even more. So they did this, right? So he ended up convincing all these people that his grandmother had died, she had it, and he ends up getting super far into the game. Now, of course, when the truth comes out, everybody hates this guy, even more than they did in the game, right? In fact, Jeff Probst, the host, he actually said at one point that John Dalton is one of the most despicable people he's ever known in his entire life. And he's banned him from ever being on Survivor again. But basically, what does this come down to? It comes down to truthfulness. It comes down to being an authentic person. And if you're a person who you feel like is authentic, and you feel like you're pretty real with people, most of the time if you tell people something, they're probably going to believe you. But there's probably in your life some people that you're going to believe more than other people. So, for example, if somebody comes and tells you something really outlandish, depending on that person's credibility, you may believe them, or you may think, oh, I don't know, maybe they're just pulling my leg, maybe it's really not true. But then there's some people in your life that you know so well, and they've been so faithful, and so steady, and so above board their entire life, that if they were to come and tell you something, you'd believe it no matter what. Because they've just been that kind of person. And you might say to yourself, I can't believe that this is true, but since so-and-so is saying it, it must be true. And that's the kind of life that Jesus is calling us to. He's calling us to be the kind of people that people will believe us no matter what, because we are always living above board. We're always living in authenticity. We're always telling people the truth. We are never leading people astray. We're never telling half-truths. We are just a truthful, honest person, and people know it. That's what Jesus is calling us to. And the problem with deceiving people, or telling people like a little untruth, sometimes we'll call them white lies, right? They're lies, but we think, well, they're not as bad as a big lie. So we kind of like justify things we say, and then you get to the really hard questions, right? Like the really, really nebulous gray areas. So like somebody calls on the phone and wants to talk to somebody else, and you say, tell them I'm not here, right? Like, is that a bad lie, right? Or somebody will even say, like, tell them I'm not here, and then like step outside the door, right? Like, because I'm not really here, right? I mean, so we can kind of get into some of these little games that we play because we want to be truthful, but we're actually still being deceptive. The problem with being deceptive is that you have to remember all your deceptions. So everything you've told somebody that's not true down through the years, you have to continue to play along with that lie forever. And you can never really tell the truth with that person. Mark Twain has this quote. He said that if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. Right? Because you're just saying what is real all the time. But if you fall into a deceitful situation, you have to continue with the deceit. And this is, we sometimes have this phrase you've heard, right? What a tangled web we weave, and first we practice to deceive, right? Because it does become a web. You have to remember all these things. But if you're always truthful and honest, you never have to remember anything. You just say what's on your mind, and you be honest and truthful, and it's always above board. The problem is that being truthful and honest all the time is sometimes super difficult. Because sometimes the truth is something that needs to be said, but you don't want to say it because you say, well, this might hurt this person's feelings. This may make somebody feel bad if I actually tell them the truth, or I really don't want to, break their spirit or whatever it may be. But there's still ways to speak the truth. One theologian put it this way: Jesus' disciples, which is us, we should be people of such integrity in character and truthfulness of heart that whatever we say is absolutely believable and dependable. He goes on to write this. He says, a person of integrity is one who in daily conversation is so truthful, dependable, genuine, guileless, and reliable that his or her words are believed without an oath. They just say something and you know it's true. And that's what really Jesus is calling us to. So my question is, I guess, how many of those words would people describe you using? Right? Would people use these words to describe you? Dependable, genuine, guileless, which basically means innocent, without deception. Reliable. Are these words that people would define you by? And if not, I think it's something that we need to work towards, right? We want to be people who are genuine, who are dependable and truthful and guileless and reliable, that people go, these are the kind of people that I totally trust in because they're honest. And that's what God's calling us to. So really the question comes down to this: am I a credible person? Do you have to convince people that you're telling them the truth? Or do they just believe you because they know you? You've had an influence on their life. You've had a track record of being honest and authentic, and they know that what you're saying is true. So I think it really comes down to this: how do we learn how to tell the truth well? Because there are different ways of telling the truth. Simply speaking, truthfully and directly, not meant to hurt people. It's not really a license to hurt people either. You can tell somebody the truth, but you can be very mean about telling somebody the truth too, right? There's a good way to tell somebody the truth, and there's a bad way to tell somebody the truth. Richard Needham, who's a Canadian humor columnist, he wrote this: people who are brutally honest, people who are brutally honest get more satisfaction out of the brutality than out of the honesty. These are people who dole out the truth like a machine gun, right? Like things that you maybe shouldn't hear in the way that they want to say them to you, because they're just being mean. But then there's people who will struggle sometimes telling you the truth because they know that what they're going to tell you may hurt. They know what they're going to tell you may be hard to take, but they've figured out a way to do it in a way that's not going to be as hurtful. And when we're supposed to speak the truth, the Bible says in love. So if we look at Ephesians, Paul writes this: speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into Him who is the head, that is Christ. Meaning we become more Christ-like if we learn to speak the truth in love. How do we do that? Paul says we have to speak with salty language. Now, in our day and age, salty means kind of like, it could be profane or crude. But in Jesus' time, here's what Paul writes to the Colossian church: let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So we're called to have this salty speech. And so obviously Paul is not talking about we need to have crude or profane language. Instead, one commentary explains it this way: seasoned with salt was used to refer to witty, amusing, clever, humorous speech. Their saltiness will prevent them from being ignored as irrelevant bores. Wow, right? So basically, salty means you're supposed to be interesting and funny and charismatic, right? Humorous, amusing, clever. This is what the Bible is saying about being salty. So Christians should be interesting people, not irrelevant bores, right? And so as you think about your conversations, would people describe your speech as salty with this definition, right? Will people look at you and say, yeah, he is witty, or she's really clever, or he's amusing, or she's humorous, right? Like, is this who we are? Are you being a person who has a magnetic personality, or are you pushing people away? Is your speech salty, or are you becoming really a boring person to listen to? Interesting, right? That this is how we're supposed to be. Let your conversation be always full of grace, right? And what's full of grace mean? It means that you're not always catching somebody on their flaws. You're not always pointing out things that they said wrong. It means that your conversations are full of grace, which means that you love people as you're speaking to them. And if they say things that are outlandish or not true or whatever, you kind of let it go, right? Because you're being a graceful person. But it should also be seasoned with salt, which doesn't mean that we just let anybody say anything, but seasoned with salt means that we're interesting people, and that we try to have conversations that make people think a little bit. So are you a person that has salty speech? Or are you a person who really has to work on it? And so those are some things to think about, right? When we get back to the same words we were talking about before, are you a person who's truthful? Are you a person who's dependable? Are you a person that somebody say, yeah, he's a genuine person, or she's really authentic? Or do they use other words to describe you? We are called to be people who are always full of grace, with conversations that are seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And that's really our prayer. Our prayer is that we can be people of truth, that we don't just swear oaths to make people believe us, that we just live an authentic life, and people go, I believe that person because I know them. They're always authentic, they're always truthful, they're always believable, and they prove themselves over and over and over again. Those are the kind of people that we have to aim to be. So I'm not sure where you are on that scale today, but wherever you are, we want to pray that God will help us be authentic. And here's the truth, right? Sometimes maybe you fit this bill, and other times maybe you fail to fit this bill. Sometimes you feel like, yeah, I am a truthful person, I am an honest person, I am a person who's trying to be real with other people. I am a person who's full of grace. But then on some days, right, when you're in a different mood, right, we can become people who are not truthful. We can become mean-spirited. We can become the kind of truthful person that just blows people down with the truth. And it's really probably a mix for both of us, for both sides of this thing. But we're called to live lives that are truthful and honest, that we're people who our yes does truly mean yes, and our no does truly mean no, and we don't have to try to convince people of what we're talking about. Would you pray with me? Father in heaven, we thank you for your word today, and Lord, we pray that you continue to lead us to be people who are full of grace, that our conversations would be seasoned with salt, Lord, that we would be interesting people to the people around us. We pray you'd help us to be truthful, Lord, when it's hard to be truthful. We pray that you would work us to be dependable people, that when we say something, that people can depend on what we're doing and what we're saying we're going to do. That we can be reliable people. Lord, that when people see us, that they would be inspired to be people like us. And Lord, when we fail, we thank you for your grace. We thank you for your understanding. We thank you for that you continue to forgive us over and over again when we come to you and we repent. So thank you, Lord, for who you are. We pray you continue to lead us down the path of righteousness, the path of leading lives that are inspiring to other people. And we thank you in advance for what we do even this week through our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.